This video then is not designed to aim towards producing any particular scene. It's just going to be about lighting, using the light lab, and primarily about the radial light. As you can see on the create shelf, there are quite a few light sources available in Bryce, and probably too many to cover all in one video because it could get a bit confusing. So in this video, just the radial light we'll be looking at. Now if we go back and have a quick look at my scene, it's already been set up, and I've set it up in a particular way to explain how other lighting effects can influence your scene before you even introduce a new light source. So what I'm going to do is strip this back so that we can control the environment and just see the effect of the new light source. I've emphasized some of the things to make it easier to see the effects. So first of all, you'll note that the sun is lighting this scene. So if I move the sun ball around there, you can see the shadows move around. So the first thing I'm going to get rid of is the sunlight, and I could do it this way. If I hold the Alt key down and click on the sun color, I can set the luminance through this HLS tab here to 0, and that's essentially got rid of the sunlight. That's not made the scene completely black though. There's something else providing light into this scene, and quite obviously it's the haze. In this case, it's providing quite a lot of lighting effect. Even though it's non-directional and it's not really casting shadows, it's still lighting up the scene. So one way of getting rid of the haze, we could hold the I think it's the Alt key down and click on the haze control there. That kills the haze. We'll pop that back in just for an example's sake, or we could just simply turn the atmosphere off. So now you can see there's still light in this scene. There's this reddish light, and this is coming from the sky dome colour, which is a light that lights from above vertically downwards. As you can see, it's not casting shadows underneath this object, and the reason for that in this case is because the sky dome doesn't cast shadows. It only casts shadows on the object geometry, so, and responds to bump as it happens. So if we hold the Alt key down and click on that again, I can set the luminance of that to make it fully black, and that means that that's no longer providing a light source in this scene. But still, there is light. We've got the reflected light of the sky here on this reflective object. Well, we could remove the influence of that by turning the atmospheric colour to black. So, and now what does that leave? Oh, well, that leaves this glowing green noggin, and this is the global ambient colour that's providing this effect. Now we had the choice. We could turn the global ambient colour to fully black, and that would get rid of the effect just as we have with the others, or we could get rid of the effect within the material. So if I go into the material, edit the material, I could just reset it to the default grey, and that would set the ambient response to 0, and at that point it would vanish. Because sometimes you will need to use the global ambient to create an effect, like lighting volumetric clouds for example, so you need to control it in the material. At other times you don't need it in your lighting environment, in which case just get rid of it. So at this point, if we give it a quick render, we're just rendering a fully black scene, which means we're now ready to introduce our light source. So I'll go to the create shelf here and click on radial light, and we'll have a look how that looks in the scene. Okay, it's appeared inside this ported object in the foreground. As you can see, it's light in the interior and light's coming out. If you look very carefully, there's light coming out through the solid object. Well, if we look at the solid object's material properties, we can see that it casts shadows, so it shouldn't really be coming out like that. What I'll do is I'll select the radial light. We'll go into the light lab now, and I'm going to increase the diffuse light, so that's just making it brighter. You can see in the preview here that it's got brighter, and indeed we can render in scene, and that will allow us to see a little preview window of what's going on there. And now if I render that, you can see there's definitely light coming through the solid object, and the reason for this is nothing to do with the light source. If the light source could create this effect depending on settings in the light source, but it's not doing so. If we just have a look where that might occur, we can control the shadow intensity here, but the shadow intensity is set at 100, so it shouldn't be allowing light to escape from this object. We checked the materials, we checked the light. The answer lies in the Skylab, and it's here. We've got the sun, moon, shadow intensity control at 50%. We need 100% intensity because this is a global control. This affects all the light sources in the scene, and it's better to have this at 100, and then if you need this effect of light travelling through the solid objects, control it individually at the light source level. And the other thing we can do here is disable the sunlight. So even if the sunlight was white, disabling it here is probably the most effective method, and that allows you to cut it out entirely from your scene. It's a good thing to check when you load a scene, particularly if you're loading in a sky that's been made by somebody else and you don't know how they've set it up, and particularly with skies that were made for older versions of Bryce, because this obviously was an easy way of creating the illusion of ambient light. Then setting the intensity up to 100 is a good thing to do. You can always turn it down later, otherwise it'll start interfering. So now we've done that, we're in a position to see that the light's been stopped inside the object, and only where the holes are is the light being let out. So what I'm going to do now is lift the light up over the scene and light the scene. So here we go, we've got our light lighting the scene generally, and at this point we can now look at the controls we've got available to us. So I'll go into the light lamp for this object, and you can see first of all we've got this diffuse and we've got this specular. Now the diffuse light, if you look at the preview, is just making it brighter and brighter, which is fair enough. But what you might not be initially aware of is that you can also subtract light from your scene. At the point you subtract light from a scene that hasn't got any lighting in it, you don't get to see anything at all. So I'm subtracting light from this scene, but we have no light source. So at this point I probably ought to reintroduce a light source to show this effect. So I can go into the Skylab and I can re-enable the sunlight, and then you can see that because the sunlight's shining on the entire environment, the light's being sucked away locally around the radial light. So there you've got the option of having a positive light source and a negative light source. Using negative light sources is a little bit tricky. It's you need to really think carefully about what you're doing, because if you have this controls the colour, by the way. So if we have a red coloured light source in the diffuse channel here, as you can see, nice red light. If we turn that into negative light, it doesn't come out red, because it's actually pulling the red out of the available light, so it creates an inverting effect. So it's difficult to deal with just white negative light sources in your scenes, trying to work out what you're going to do with them. But if you start making them coloured as well, things get really quite complicated. So that's the diffuse control. Now there's this other control under here. In fact, I'm going to set the diffuse down so it's a bit weaker, that controls the specular. Now if we turn this up, in the preview you can't see there's very much happening in the scene, except perhaps on this object. And the reason for this is the default grey material doesn't have any specular response. This material that's been set up by myself and using images by Horror to create a metallic effect has got the specular response set and anisotropic, which relates to the specularity. These don't, they're default grey. So if I go into this Noggins material again and edit that, I can make it respond to specular light source. Now I'm not going to go into a great deal about this because that's a material property, but you need to be aware that the light sources, some light sources produce specular light and some don't. Now you can see it's created a plastic-like highlights. Specularity is useful in that it creates the illusion of reflection without the time overhead of the rays bouncing off. So it's sort of a halfway house between having reflective object and a matte object. So you create sort of a plastic effect with specularity and some metallic effects when combined with reflection and anisotropic shading. Likewise, our light source, I'm just looking from above here, we go. If I can get hold of the light source, I'll move back over here a bit, can produce specular light. It doesn't have to produce diffuse light. It can produce negative specular light and positive light, or it can produce both negative, or it can produce positive specularity and negative light. All these different combinations, as you were seeing in the preview, create different effects, and this can be used to create some really unusual special effects. And I know that Rashad actually managed to create an excellent velvet material using negative light combined with other lighting solutions, but we're getting a bit off topic there. We'll try and stick to this. So that allows us to set our diffuse, which responds in the material diffuse channel, the specular in the specular channel, as well as being linked to the anisotropic effect. This colour, we just set the light colour, so you can pick it out of a little colour picker there, or if we hold the Alt key down, we can either select it through RGB values. This one, I'm not really sure quite what it does, but this one I use a lot because it allows me to set the luminance value very easily. And there's another one there as well, which what's that, cyan, magenta, yellow. Again, I don't use that very much, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be aware of it. The other option for colouring is to use the gradient, and you can import gradients from a saved file, which is looking for this type of file format, and you can edit your own. At the moment, on the left hand side here, this will be the bright side, and that'll be going down to the dark side. So we'll have I'll just select our gradient here, and we'll see how it's lighting our scene at the moment. Not at all, I would say, and we've still got the sun active. So I'll disable the sunlight to simplify matters again, and we'll see where we are with this. Okay, there's a tiny bit of light there somewhere, so I'll edit this and I'll increase the intensity of the light until we get to see something in the scene. Right, there you go. So as you can see, without the specular lighting, some materials begin to look quite flat. So this metallic material here, just because it's reflecting and there's not much in the scene, looks quite matte without that special effect. So as I say, that's something to be aware of with your light sources. The gradient at the moment is bright where of the light sources, and it's fading out, and the range is measured in Bryce units. So if we increase the range, the gradient will spread over a wider distance as the fall off fades away. And you have the option of editing this, and you have this neat little editor that allows you to change the colour controls. So we could change this, that represents this colour here, so we change that to red. We can move that around and you can see how it's changing the response, and this is the transitional area. You can add additional ones. We could change the colour to green. We could change the colour of this black one to blue, and you can add and subtract additional ones as you go along. I think when you add them, they always appear in the middle. Then whichever one's selected has got this little arrow underneath it that allows you to remove it again. So if I say set this up red, green, blue, and then we can see the effect of that within the scene. And the other option underneath that is to have a transparency. So if we go to transparency here, the opacity, black in this case, is solid, which is exactly the opposite that you get when you're using it in the material channel, by the way. And if you want it to become transparent, you set it to white, and so you can see now we've got this transparency control, which then affects the light levels over the gradient. And finally, in here, we've got this offset that determines where it starts and finishes. So if you increase the offset, it's starting further along on the gradient channel there. I mean, the best way to understand the way this control works is just to have a play with it. You've got this little editor here, and I wonder, well, that's just a control for the offset. You see, I don't use this very much, so it's as much a learning experiment for me as it is for you seeing me experiment with it. So what I usually do, as in with all the material channels, is choose colours that allow you to see what's going off in different points, and adjust things so you can see where the ranges begin and end. So if I was to move the range over here like this, you can see where this transition is corresponding to in the world where we've got the effect taking place, and then at that point where you can see transitions are taking place, you can fine tune the effects. So if I wanted to bring these in a bit, then I would go back in here and like move these up possibly, and see where they ended up there. See, I've moving them in, moved them up, and so on and so forth. So that's covered that, I think. Okay, so we'll go back to uniform lighting, which is now a bit bright. We'll set it more or less to the level on this preview so we can see what we're doing. and we'll move on to using a gel, which I have provided a specific video for using a gel for an effect, but we'll cover it here as well. So if we use a gel and select image first of all, that's the image for the material. What I'll do is I'll load in a specific image, this caustics effect that I got from Genetics 3.6 Pro, so it's a repeating pattern, and I'll just apply that and we can see what we get. So the gel has coloured the light source, but as you can see there's a mapping mode tear along there, which suggests that it's not an appropriate mapping mode for this type of image. Now go into the material properties for the light source, we can see that it's automatically and inappropriately selected this sinusoidal, probably the most useless mapping mode that there is in the Bryce, and the least appropriate for almost any image map that you would get. So in this case, because I know what type of mapping mode is required, I'm going to use world top, and because it's a repeating pattern, that should help link it up. But the type of light source also is affecting the way that it's mapped. So it's having a world space, but it's got this distortion. It's not like a straight down light. Because it's a point light source, it's distorting as it travels out at a shallower and shallower angle from the light source. Another option, and I'm going to move the camera up so you can just get a bit of a better view what's going on here, is to choose a material that's mapped in a different way to get a different effect. So there's a point light source, it'd probably be more suited to spherical mapping. Now as things stand, this image is not suited for a spherical map. If we stick it on a spherical map, there we go, get it in spherical mode, so that's not too bad. What I was going to say is that you've got the option of loading in spherically mapped images if you've pre-prepared them. So here's one I pre-prepared. If you saw the tutorial I did previous to this about the mapping modes, then you'll see as I've loaded it, it's loaded in stupid sinusoidal mode, so that's something to be aware of. Switch it over to spherical mode, and I can then project a suitable spherical map that maps all the way around, so even above and below and everywhere around the light source you can map a pattern on that works every which way. But again, I suppose I'm digressing into materials now. The other option with gels is to use a procedural, and in this case, or when we've switched over to procedural, it's remembered where we are in the material lab. So as well as editing the light source's material properties, you have the alternative. If you're in the light lab, just click on procedural and it'll remember that it was using the textures for you. So that's handy. You can use any pre-made material that you happen to have. So if we go into the Pro Materials, Pro Materials here, and have a look for something that might provide a suitable effect. Let's see, can we use volumetrics? That's got to be worth a shot. Yes, it looks like we can. So you can even pick volumetric materials out and it'll do a projection through them. So at this point, any material which can be accessed through the material properties of the light source or through the light lab and then through this procedural button can be used as a light gel to change the properties of the light coming from the light source and falling on your scene. So that's covered your light gels briefly. There is another tutorial if you want to go into more detail with that. Now we'll move on to fall off. Well, the fall off is quite straightforward. It says the light decays over distance. Linear seems the most natural. If none, as you can see, the light just continues until it hits and it never decays, so it's really very bright. Linear, as I said, most natural. Squared is very dim, and you'll have to pump the diffuse output. I mean, you can barely see what's going on in this scene now with squared. The light source falls off very rapidly. And ranged, you get to set the range. Again, you can use this slider, and it just falls off at the end of that range. So it's 50 will light some things in the scene. Let's try 70. See, get a bit more. You see a bit more of the scene. So it's very bright right up until the point it hits the limit of its range, and then it just fades away. So if you're wanting a very high degree of control over the light sources in your scene, then consider what fall off can do for you. This control, influence, is excellent. Now you can really do quite a lot with the influence control when it comes to fine control of the lighting in your scene. So what you can do with this is we could exclude the noggin at the back, and that means it's not lit by this light source. So it not being lit by that light source might be a bit inconvenient, but you might have reason to want, for example, a certain type of effect to fall on this material from this light source, and provide another light source for this one that's not providing that effect. So if I duplicate Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V that light source, I can edit it, and I could switch it from exclude, because we've already got this checked, to include, and that means that this light source will only be lighting that. Now you'll notice it's not casting a shadow now because it's not lighting the ground. So there you go, we've lit this, we've managed to make it so that this doesn't cast a shadow just by controlling the light sources. This is going to be something that is a result of wanting to create a specific effect within a scene, but you just need to be aware you have this option. So if we edit this light source now, we've made this one red, so that's falling on the noggin. We can edit this light source now, and we can make this one green. So make it the green colour there, and that's falling on everything else but that, but it could fall on both. If we go to this other light, we're including, we can include the plane. So now, as you can see, juggling the different excludes and includes, you have the option of excluding things completely, excluding things and not other things, or including two things. So where the green and the red are falling on the included plane, they mix to form yellow. Otherwise this is only lit with red and this is only lit with green, and you get corresponding shadows because of the differences in the lights falling on them. So that's a really useful facility, particularly for optimizing renders where you might specifically be using like a soft shadow. I shouldn't get onto that yet, should I? No, we'll cover that in a bit. Anyway, you can see how that works. That's the important thing. So we'll go back to our radial light, and I suppose since I've just mentioned it, while we've made our way down here, we'll go back up this. So shadow softness allows you to soften the shadows coming from your light source. Now we're in regular render mode. I'll just correct the exclusion thing there, so it's not excluding that object. Right. In a regular rendering, it's applied automatically. It can look a bit grainy if it's too soft. If you go into render options and you choose a premium effect, you have to actively engage soft shadows for it to take effect. If we don't have that engaged, I'll just lower the raise per pixel so we get to render quite quickly. Then you still get hard shadows even though you set it soft. So you go in the render options, soft shadows have to be engaged if you want your light sources that have been set to soft shadows to generate them. And the other point would be in a premium effect, raise per pixel is going to affect the level of graininess. So, but I don't want this to be about render options. I just want you to be aware that you know, if you go to a premium effect and all your objects stop casting the soft shadows, that's the reason. The next control here is shadow intensity, and that, I'll just get rid of soft shadows because it does slow things down. That operates for the light source very much like the global control for the sun. So we can set the shadow intensity down to 50, and that will mean that the light travels through the objects and lights the things behind them. It's not a very realistic way of lighting a scene, but it does allow you to optimize scenes if you don't use it too heavily. If you don't set the control, don't let too much light through, just let a bit. Shadow ambience is an interesting one. That allows you to fill in the shadows with this colour. Now if you set it too high, it actually lights the shadows up, which is a bit weird. But if you use it at a careful level, again it can be a way of optimizing your scene to create the illusion of a better lighting effect by making ambience that's fairly cheap to generate in terms of render time. I would prefer to use better lighting solutions, HDRI lighting, true ambience lighting, to create this effect, but the price of that is that obviously the render time goes up tremendously. Finally then, because I very rarely save a light source in a light source memory and all these things relate to other types of light source. I don't do animation, sorry. We can look at these visible objects. So if we make the light source a visible object, the first option that becomes engaged there is surface. Not seeing anything. Right, we'll turn the sun back on here, so the sunlight's back on, and I'll just lower it down and see if we can. I'm not seeing anything. I've got a feeling it was something to do with atmospherics, but I'm still not seeing anything. I'm sure I got this to work before. I'll try resetting the sky because I've tinkered with things a lot. Is that it? That is it. So the sum effect there, I wonder if it's on the ambient side. And yes, it is. That's answered the question then. Right, atmosphere off, and we'll just turn the sky fully black, turn the sun off. Look, because I've reset the sky, the shadow intensity has gone back to 90 and we want that at 100. So the answer to that is, if you want it a surface visible object, the effect is driven by ambient channel. So that's worth knowing. Volume. If we turn it to volume, if this was a spotlight, infinite light would make that extend, but because it's a radial light, it has no influence on that control. So infinite light's another control we don't need to worry about when just dealing with radial lights. There you've got a volume, and I suspect this volume is also going to be to some degree governed by the material that you choose for it. So there you go. So using that material, but you'll notice even though that's been applied to its visible light, it's not actually applied anything to the light source, unless you use gel, in which case you can get the whole lot. So that's quite a good effect. Quite like that. And finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset this before I get any further, because it's going to make things complicated. I'll create another light source. Finally then, we've got this flare. I find flare quite difficult to get on with, but here's the way it works. An image, right, image, I prepared this image in PaintShop Pro 8. What you want is that in the alpha channel, and then set this one to white, because otherwise the dark areas will be selected. So this, yes, I don't want to delete that bit. Right, so this is an alpha channel, this is full white's going to be the colour, and the only thing that works if we go into the material properties, hang on, it's hidden that from me, edit procedural, no, it's just on the image. It's a bit of a weird thing, this. So that's going to be the colour, and this selects it in the alpha. Black's transparent, white is where you've got your effect, and then that appears in your scene, and it's applied to like a 2D disc, and wherever you move your light source, it positions that in your scene to create your effect. So I think if we put it just off the edge, you can still see it, it's just off the edge there. So it's a bit like an effect applied to a 2D disc, but if you load the image in and you well, I will load here, we'll load this, and you keep both, then what you get is some grey areas, so it looks much darker. I'll have to put the sky colour in here so you can see the effect. See, we're getting the grey from the other part of the image because of using it as an alpha. And if we edit this and we just use fully white here, then that's going to be solid, and you can see how it's applied to a 2D disc, and you're getting the full white making it solid. You're just seeing the effect. So if you want to get this, the easiest way to do it is to make sure that you've got full white if you want a white lens flare effect, and then you've got the alpha here. The point I would make is that lens flare effect is something that occurs in the camera lens system, not in the scene. So really it's better applied in post work, but you could produce an interesting special effect, and Rashad's created a fantastic picture with this effect. In fact, I'll just show you that. Okay, this is Zen by Rashad Carter, and he's used the lens flare effect here to create this burst of light and his transparency effect behind these leaves, and I think honestly that's one of the best pictures well, he's ever done, and one of the best pictures I've seen in Bryce. I really like that scene. So anyway, that's done with the lens flare effect. You can find that on bryce5.com. So, where was I? Oh yes, I was looking at this. Finally, the final bit, you must be really fed up by now, is if you use a procedural, how does this work? Well, what I'm going to do is find a pattern that I can use that'll make life easy for me. If I go to basic, then you'll be able to find it yourself. Use this basic gradient bar, right, and I'm going to apply it to a 2D disk to show you, so that it doesn't behave according to this spherical map. It only pays attention to the diffuse colour and the transparency. Those are the only two properties it has when it's being driven by this. And as you can see, its mapping is somewhat eccentric. So it's not obeying the mapping mode, it invents its own mapping mode, and it moves around a bit strangely when you so if we've got two of these and reposition them, you can see the position is also altering the angle. So driving the flare effect by procedural textures, it's difficult, very difficult, tricky to get any kind of effect you had in mind. I mean, you can get some interesting effects, but I don't know how you'd plan them out because it's all a bit eccentric. So that's that, really. I think it's gone on for far too long about this topic. I hope that's been helpful to you. I know it's only been focused on one thing and not done really anything very pretty with it, but that was the idea, just to cover the lighting, the light lab, and in this case just the radial light. So I think that's everything now. I'm just having a look. Have I covered everything? Well, if I haven't, you just have to let me know and I'll make another tutorial. Cheers now.